When a phrase reveals the shadow, it not only conveys the meaning of what a man is saying, but also uncovers what he may be trying to hide. There are words that merely touch the surface, and there are words that penetrate deeper and reveal the truth, because phrases spoken naturally, in the course of ordinary conversation, can carry an invisible weight that the soul senses, even when the mind tries to reject or downplay it. Carl Jung, in his exploration of the hidden layers of the human psyche, concluded that language is one of the main paths to discovering the shadow, that unconscious part of us which operates without our awareness, manipulates us when we least notice it, and wounds us in ways we do not even understand. Especially in close relationships, where intimacy is present, words carry not only intentions but also hidden truths that even the speaker may be unaware of. That is why a seemingly harmless phrase can turn out to be a veiled cry of pain, control, or devaluation. What is said is not just what is spoken, it is also what forms in the subtle, invisible energetic space between two people. And if you're not attentive, you can fall into the trap of subtle verbal violence that, accumulating over time, begins to erode self-worth, distort the perception of reality, and distance you from yourself. Language is an instrument of the unconscious, capable of both manipulation and liberation, and everything depends on who uses it and who listens to it. As Jung asserted, everything that does not become conscious becomes fate. If you ignore the signals, normalize the phrases that hurt or humiliate you, you risk reliving the same destructive patterns over and over again, without even realizing that the key to liberation is already nearby, in the words you allowed to go unnoticed. Recognizing such phrases is not paranoia, it is wisdom, emotional protection, and an expression of self-love. And when you begin to listen not just with your ears, but with your soul, you suddenly realize that some things must not be tolerated, even if your heart is attached, because what begins with a single misguided phrase can end in a life lived in a suffocating, lightless space. In this video, we will dive together into 5 phrases that, according to Carl Jung's philosophy and the perspective of depth psychology, should never be tolerated in a relationship. These are phrases that reveal control, emotional manipulation, denial of responsibility, and a lack of respect for your personhood. These are the kinds of phrases that, when spoken regularly, signal, there is no healing here, only the necessity to choose yourself and walk away. This is not about striving for perfection or judging another person, but about the ability to recognize boundaries which, when violated again and again, stop being mistakes and become laws. And you are not obligated to live by the law of pain because you were born for something else. Prepare to listen with an awakened heart, because when you learn to understand what is truly hidden behind words, you begin to free yourself from the chains that once seemed invisible. The first phrase, "You're going crazy, you're exaggerating." Few words wound a woman's emotional integrity as deeply as this one, especially when it comes in the form of, "You're crazy, you're overreacting," or "You're making a mountain out of a molehill." The first time you hear it, you might start to doubt yourself, give space to uncertainty, and think, maybe I am overreacting. But if this phrase is repeated again and again, whether gently or aggressively, it begins to seep into the most intimate layers of your self-perception. This is precisely what makes it so dangerous. It's not just a dismissive comment, it is a conscious or unconscious attempt to distort your reality, to undermine your intuition, and, in essence, to make you question your own truth. Carl Jung devoted a significant part of his work to the study of the shadow, the unconscious and repressed part of a person that tends to project onto others what it cannot accept in itself. And when a man tells a woman that she's crazy, he is often projecting his own emotional instability onto her, his fear of truths he'd rather not face, and his inability to cope with what she is expressing. By accusing her of exaggeration, he's not just avoiding the issue, he's turning the woman into the issue. This is an old but dangerous inversion of blame, a subtle and destructive form of psychological manipulation known as gaslighting. Gaslighting is a process of emotional destabilization where the victim begins to doubt her own perception, memory, and even sanity. A woman who hears such phrases may start to wonder, am I overreacting? Am I just too sensitive? And over time, she loses her grounding, because if she can't trust her own feelings, then who can she trust? But Jung taught that the unconscious does not lie, and the body does not lie. Intuition, even when silenced by words of invalidation, doesn't disappear, it begins to ache. because it is precisely where we were taught to doubt ourselves that the path to emotional suffering begins. The phrase "you're exaggerating" is dangerous not because it's loud, but because it's whispered, as if out of care, while carrying the poison of invalidation. Once accepted, it becomes the doorway to other forms of abuse. Because if you start believing you're exaggerating, tomorrow you'll agree that you're too sensitive, and then that you're too demanding and too complicated. And that's when your inner voice stops sounding like your own and begins to echo the voice of the one who is suppressing you. That's why the healthiest response to such a phrase is not an argument, but a pause, a deep breath, and a question to yourself. What is being devalued in me right now? What is my soul trying to reveal? What is he trying to silence? And if the answer comes through pain, that is a sign it's time to stop and interrupt the situation. Jung said that without pain, consciousness is not possible, but to ignore pain is a sure path to destruction. And if someone says these words to you again and again, they do not love you, they are trying to destroy you. Because love, even when imperfect, never seeks to silence the truth of the one it loves. The second phrase, "If you really loved me, you would do this for me." At first glance, it may seem like a plea for attention, a complaint, or even an expression of love. After all, it appears that someone who loves just wants to be understood. But if you look deeper, it becomes clear that this phrase carries the weight of demand, emotional blackmail, and subtle manipulation, because it turns love into a transaction, an exchange of concessions for approval. It replaces dialogue with guilt and forces a woman into a cruel dilemma: either compromise her boundaries or accept the idea that she supposedly doesn't love enough. Jung argued that one of humanity's greatest illusions is the belief that guilt can change another person, but in reality, this leads to the opposite: relationships in which guilt becomes a tool of submission. When a man says, "If you loved me, you'd do it," what he's really testing is how far you're willing to abandon yourself to prove your worth and earn the right to stay close. That means this phrase isn't a request, it's an attack on your personal integrity. It suppresses, sows doubt about your love, distorts the meaning of care, and leads a woman to believe that true love requires self-sacrifice. But that is a lie. True love never demands self-betrayal. It is never built on fear or guilt. It invites, it does not demand. It is created together, with mutual respect for each other's boundaries. From Jung's perspective, healthy relationships are a space where partners act as mirrors and support for one another in the journey toward wholeness. And that's exactly why mutual acceptance, including the ability to say no, must be present. To love is not to manipulate, it is to respect boundaries, even when they contradict your own desires. Someone who truly loves does not play with emotions, impose conditions, or test you. They speak openly and clearly, because love has no need for trials or manipulations. It reveals itself through clarity, honesty, and respect for the other. When you hear this phrase over and over again, ask yourself, why am I constantly being asked to prove my love through actions that hurt me? Because the one who demands that you change in the name of their love is, in truth, saying, "Love me only the way I want, on the timeline that suits me." And that is no longer love, it's control, disguised as closeness. And most importantly, you do not need to prove that you love. True love doesn't beg, bargain, or measure itself by coerced actions. It flows freely, with mutual respect. Anything that demands suffering in exchange for the right to stay close is, more likely, not love but attachment, fear, or an unconscious repetition of a traumatic pattern that needs to be broken. As Jung said, the shadow appears where there is repression, and when you abandon your truth to please someone else, you feed the shadow, which sooner or later will turn against you. The price is always the same: the loss of yourself. The third phrase, "You'll never find someone like me." At first glance, it may sound like a warning, but in reality, it's a subtle trap, a psychological poison hidden behind an innocent facade. Because when a man tells a woman, "You'll never find someone like me," what he's really doing is planting the idea of scarcity, that he is rare, irreplaceable, superior, that the world beyond this relationship has nothing better to offer, and that she should settle for what she has, even if it's destroying her. Jung taught that anything that inflates the ego excessively is rooted in the shadow. And a phrase like this, though it may appear confident, actually conceals deep insecurity, fear of abandonment, and an unconscious need for control. Because someone who is truly aware of their worth does not diminish another's world or position themselves as the one and only. A whole, healthy person doesn't try to be irreplaceable, they simply offer themselves sincerely. But the one who says this phrase is playing on fear, suggesting there is nothing beyond this relationship. He pushes you into a cage disguised as protection. And the most dangerous part is that this phrase begins to take root, sowing doubt. It makes you, even after humiliation, think, maybe he's right, maybe no one else will be better. You start to silence your own desires, your boundaries, your intuition. You cling not to real love, but to the fear of losing it. And that fear feeds a cycle of self-destruction, of tolerating the intolerable, of holding on to a relationship that has ceased to be a choice and become mere survival. From Jung's perspective, this is a classic projection. The man shifts the responsibility of validating his worth onto the woman, and the threat of losing her becomes a weapon of pressure. He fears rejection, so he flips the narrative, making it seem like she is the one who loses everything if she dares to walk away. This is a psychological inversion, where a woman's freedom is perceived as a threat, and the bond turns into control, not connection. But here is the liberating truth. There is no one in the world so irreplaceable that they justify your suffering. There is no relationship worth the cost of your inner peace. Because true love is a flow, it embraces what aligns with your truth, and lets go of what diminishes you. Whatever shrinks you must eventually be released. So if someone tells you you'll never find anyone like me, take a deep breath and remember who you are. You are not here to settle for emotional crumbs disguised as exclusivity. You are here to find freedom, not threat, expansion, not fear. A meeting where you don't have to compete with anyone, because you have already met yourself. The fourth phrase, you're never satisfied. This phrase often arises in moments of conflict, when a woman expresses dissatisfaction, points out a mistake, or asks for something reasonable. Presence, attention, being heard, respect. And what does she receive in response? Not an attempt to understand or engage in dialogue, but a verdict, a judgmental label that, instead of acknowledging her words, dismisses her feelings. You're never satisfied. In other words, the issue isn't with his actions, it's with her emotions. Carl Jung called this kind of behavior a defensive projection. When a person refuses to acknowledge their own shadow, their inattentiveness, rigidity, selfishness, they shift the blame onto someone else. By saying this phrase, a man invalidates the woman's emotional experience. He silently implies that she is ungrateful, too demanding, always asking for more than he can or wants to give. In doing so, he protects his ego while deeply wounding the soul standing before him. The consequences of this phrase are destructive. It doesn't just shut down the conversation. It wounds the heart. The woman begins to believe she's asking too much. She starts to doubt herself. Maybe I am too emotional, too sensitive, too demanding. And over time, she falls silent, swallows her pain, and convinces herself that speaking up is wrong, that expecting more is selfish. But that is not the truth. Expecting respect, affection, reciprocity, and attention is not excessive, it is an expression of dignity. And those who twist this narrative are often trying to normalize absence, justify emotional coldness, and maintain control over the relationship. Jung said that the soul suffers when the heart is forced to deny its truth. And every time you accept this phrase as truth, you silence your soul, drift away from your intuition, and adapt to an emotional reality that doesn't nourish you, a reality that only exists because someone convinced you. You are the problem. Worse still, this narrative begins to repeat. It becomes a law, a habit. And over time, the woman not only accepts less than she deserves, she forgets she's allowed to want more. This phrase is not just an impulsive comment, it is a subtle attempt to convince you that you shouldn't want anything at all, keeping you in a state of low expectations. That is precisely why this phrase is so dangerous. It steals your courage to dream of something better, to set boundaries, to say no, to say enough. Someone who truly loves you doesn't invalidate your feelings, doesn't mock your pain, and doesn't accuse you of being ungrateful when you express a legitimate need. Mature love listens, strives to understand, and seeks dialogue. Soulful love accepts differences with respect, not with contempt. So if you've heard this phrase often, and felt that something inside you went silent because of it, pay attention. These relationships may not be suppressing your essence with malice, but they are suppressing it nonetheless. And if you have to silence yourself just to keep him calm, maybe it's time to choose yourself. Fifth phrase, I'd be happier with any other woman. Saying this is like poisoning the soil and expecting something alive to grow in it. This is the coldest blow you can deliver in a relationship, a comparison, belittlement, and threat all at once. When a man tells a woman that he'd be happier with anyone else, he is not merely expressing disappointment, he is driving an invisible knife into her self-awareness, her self-worth, and her emotional safety. And he knows this, even if it's at the unconscious level. Jung wrote that the soul withers when it is reduced to the insignificant. This phrase humiliates your essence, making you feel inadequate, easily replaceable, the worst of all. Such a statement destroys the foundation of trust and openness needed for any relationship to grow, because it plants the idea that love is a service that can be taken away and given to someone else, someone easier, more submissive, more convenient. This is not just emotional violence, it's a symbolic threat, an attempt to control the fear of loss, a typical maneuver of those who do not seek to create but to control. By saying this, a man shifts responsibility for his unhappiness onto the woman. My dissatisfaction is because of you, and you are to blame for my life not being what I wanted it to be. And this is not just a lie, it is deeply toxic. Jung explained that the other person in a relationship is a mirror. What irritates us in a partner often shows what we do not accept in ourselves. A man who says he would be better off with another woman is actually trying to escape from himself, from his own shadows, frustrations, voids, and emotional instability. He projects his unhappiness outward to avoid looking inside, using comparison as a whip to suppress you. But soulful love does not humiliate, does not hurt to prove a point, and does not destroy for the sake of control. Healing love does not turn the other person into a vessel for its own suffering. It listens, seeks dialogue, and, if separation is necessary, it does so with respect, not contempt. This phrase, repeated, leaves invisible scars. The woman starts to ask herself why she is inadequate, what is wrong with her, why she can't be the one who will make him happy, and she enters a vicious cycle of self-denial, desperate attempts to please, and losing herself. But the truth is, no one is responsible for another person's emotional happiness. There is meeting, partnership, shared creativity, but not replacement. If you have heard this, know that you are not the problem. And even if there were good moments in the relationship, this phrase is a clear warning sign that the soil around you is poisoned. Where there is no respect, there is no healthy love. And where there is a hidden threat, there is no safety, only emotional submission. As Jung said, a soul that awakens does not accept life where it is not seen. And you deserve to be in a place where your essence is not compared, but celebrated, where you are not measured, but valued. Where no one says, I'd be better off with someone else, but instead chooses to be with you every day. When the soul listens clearly, it is liberated. The soul always knew with courage. From the beginning, it caught the tone behind the words, felt discomfort behind the compliments, and sensed manipulation disguised as care. But the mind, accustomed to justifying, giving in, hoping that things would change one day, made it suppress this deep knowing. And so many women lose themselves not because they don't see the signs, but because they believe they are exaggerating, because they believe the echo of phrases that gradually took away their voice. Jung said that the process of individuation, becoming who you are, begins when we stop running from the truth and start integrating it. And for that, courage is needed, the courage to look directly, the courage to hear what the words of others truly mean, the courage to leave a place where the soul is not allowed to grow, the courage to choose yourself, even if it means leaving. If you recognize these phrases in your past to breathe, this is not a sign of weakness, it is a sign of awakening. The hardest part is already done, you saw. And for Jung, seeing is the first step to transformation. After that, it's not about reacting with anger or blaming yourself. It's about remembering who you are and who you never should have stopped being just to fit into someone else's narrative. You are not alone. Many have been through this and found strength where it seemed there was only pain. Because every time a woman says no to the pattern that seeks to extinguish her light, she is simultaneously saying yes to a new life. A life where words that heal are spoken, not words that wound. If this message touched you, like it. This shows you are awake, aware, and ready to take control of your own story. Share this video with those who need open eyes, with those who have heard these phrases and haven't yet understood that love does not wound with words. And if you want to continue this journey, the path of self-knowledge, emotional strength, and wisdom for real relationships, subscribe to the channel. Every video here is a mirror, and every reflection is a step toward your freedom. Remember, the soul listens, and when it hears clearly, it no longer agrees to live in the dark.